Hey y'all, my name is Téa Lynor, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create. I am so pleased to have Téa Lynor on the show. Téa is a freelance writer and filmmaker based in Savannah, Georgia. She has a passion for all things campy and whimsical. I think we're going to get along. Having begun her journey as an aspiring storyteller, posting short films and a web series on YouTube, Téa propels forward with her award-winning short film, The Graveyard Shift. Now, with a television pilot and 2 novels in development, her spark for creativity is burning brighter than ever. Welcome to the show, Téa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Téa, you grew up in Savannah, correct? Is that where you were born?
So, yeah, I'm a military brat. So, gosh, I grew up kind of all over. Technically, I was born in Texas and grew up predominantly in North Carolina and Florida.
Okay, got it. Can you tell me how you became interested with storytelling?
Yeah, I would say growing up, if you've ever been to Fayetteville, North Carolina, it's a military town. It's a little bit rural. And so there isn't a lot of artistic culture there. There isn't a lot of artisans in general or craftsmen or, film, TV. It's so far from anyone's mind in a town like Fayetteville. And so for me and my family, our escape and our form of entertainment was movies. So whether that was watching movies in the living room or there was this $2 movie theater in Fayetteville and we would go to that. I grew up with a single mom. She was raising 4 kids. And so kind of the best and cheapest entertainment was to just drop us off at the $2 movie and we would watch something. And I think some of my earliest, most valuable memories are that movie theater. I would kind of enter a movie theater one way and kind of leave completely changed and completely different. And I think for someone with, just like a country girl, I was like, this is magical. Like, this is a transformative experience. Like, I need to know how this works. And so I would take DVDs that we would have or like the VHS and I would look at behind the scenes of all my favorite movies. So kind of how they made the movie, production design, directors, all of that. And I really fell in love with the entire process. And it just was a huge form of escapism for me. I mean, when I say I grew up country, like one of our houses was really in the middle of nowhere, like boondocks. And I would pretend to run through the forest like an emo vampire from Twilight. Like I would, have all these I would play pretend using movies as my source material. So I could be a wizard at like a magic school or I could be on a island full of dinosaurs. And I think that's when I knew it had such a big impact on me. And I started writing my own stories and then I started filming YouTube videos and kind of making my own movies from there.
Oh gosh, well, I want to go back a little bit because you might have alluded to some of your favorite movies,
Yeah.
but I'll go ahead and ask.
Yes.
What were some of your favorite movies?
So I will say, having now gone to film school, I've had to grow a thick skin because there's a lot of people who have very illustrious taste, I'll say, very highbrow taste in their favorite movies. They're like Interstellar and The Godfather. And I'm like, I love Jurassic World 3. Like, not even necessarily the first one, the third one. Like, that's one of my favorite movies. Or even Twilight, which gets, I mean, me being in film school trying to defend Twilight, it was just like pushing a boulder up a hill. Even something like that is still to this day one of my favorite movies, even though it's considered a bad movie. Or Prince of Egypt or The Craft or even like Galaxy Quest. I mean, really, like, I would say either campy or kind of indie or just like just kind of strange choices to be my favorite, but I love those movies. I will defend them to the end of my life.
I think you and I have a lot in common. I love those movies.
Yes, yeah.
Because there's a place for everything, and
Yeah.
there is the best movie. This is like amazing, but the reality is that movies, there's a comfort to it. There's a sense of escapism. There's a balm that they offer, and the balm that each film or movie offers is different for each person, and it's different per view, right? You're not necessarily going to get the same thing. I
Right.
was listening to, I forget. Oh no, I was watching the Barbie movie,
Yes. Incredible.
and they were, it's incredible. And they were talking about the sad Barbie and about how the sad Barbie is for the women. I might be misquoting it, but it's for the women who, when they're sad, they watch Pride and Prejudice or Jane Austen movies.
Oh my
I was like,
gosh.
that's what I do.
Yes. Pride and Prejudice is so up there for sure. I watch it
Oh,
every year. Oh my gosh.
yes.
Yeah.
My sister and I have a thing where we say, "Are you having a pleasant trip?" So
God, it's so amazing. We can make this a Pride and Prejudice podcast. Like,
we could,
listen,
but
we
let's
could.
not. We could. So I won't ask you what you think about the latest Persuasion because we have to keep going. We could talk about it afterwards. Okay, so I think it's one thing to be really interested in storytelling and in movies, but exactly at what point did you think about going to film school?
Honestly, very young. I really feel like I was born into the world with very like clear ideas of what I wanted for my life. Even if it kind of changed a little bit, like I was obsessed with mermaids at one point, so I was like, I'll be a marine biologist and I'll just study mermaids because that makes sense. And I think once I again started watching more movies and going to the movie theater, it really was when was 10. I remember distinctly there was kind of a switch that flipped, and it was when I learned how to use Windows Movie Maker and how to use my mom's like old like digital camera to shoot and edit films or videos. And so I started posting on YouTube when I was 10 and I made like again, back to the mermaids, I made like a mermaid web series as like a middle schooler with me and my best friend. And I would write and act and edit and direct the whole thing myself. And I think I just really loved it. Felt truly creative, and there weren't any barriers that you kind of face in film school. It really was just completely independent and democratized. And I think something I found with just people my age in general is like YouTube and the ability to make your own movies has played a huge part in a lot of our film passions because before YouTube and before, even just like Windows Movie Maker, a lot of it was gate kept. The idea of being able to make your own movie as just a normal person was off the table. It was like that's for Hollywood. That's for people over there. Especially, growing up brown, growing up poor, I was like it felt so far away. It felt like a completely different world. And so to have that power in my own hands, I was like I'm doing this. I can do this. I have to do this for the rest of my life. And it was just from 10 years old on, I was like, I'm going to film school. I'm going to make films. I'm going to find a way to, create my stories and make it real. And I've had that clear direction for a very long time.
So now that you've been able to achieve your goal of going to film school and you're on the other side, but can you tell me about some of the surprises that have come along the way in terms of things that you didn't expect that you now know? Any of that would be lovely to hear.
Yeah, I'll say to keep it specific for film school, I didn't realize truly how many barriers there were, and the barriers did not come in a artistic form. It wasn't necessarily so. For example, it kind of was like I never realized, or I was kind of surprised that not only would I have to fight for my art as an artistic person and fight for my art to be respected, but also at the same time I'm also fighting to be respected as a Black woman, and having to balance those two things was incredibly difficult in a way that I just was not expecting. And there were a lot of times where I would kind of get in little tiffs. I was a good student, but I would get in little tiffs with my professors about things because they would try to impart advice or they would try to talk about the film industry in ways that just did not apply to me or did not apply to people like me. An example of that would be some of the worst advice that I got. I had a film professor, he was a white man, and he kind of started film in the 70s. And the advice he gave me in my class was, you just have to print your resume, you have to go to a studio, a major studio like Universal, find the first person in charge and give them your resume and shoot your shot. And me and my classmates were like, I don't think it works like that anymore. I don't think you could do that at all. Like the first thought I was thinking was, I'm going to be banned from that studio and there's going to be some restraining orders. And I was like, it was not practical for this age and for people like me in general. And so there was a lot of advice, or there was a lot of things like that it was like, I felt like I had to, in a lot of ways, teach myself film while also paying for a film education that not necessarily applied to me or I felt was valuable for this time. So it was strange. It was a very surprising experience.
So what are some of the things that you had to teach yourself that perhaps your non-BIPOC counterparts didn't have to teach themselves?
I would say, this is going to sound strange, but just working in an ethical way. The way that they teach film, and also the way that the film industry is, in historical context, we just had many strikes because of how the film industry has been lately. But it's very common, for example, for a film crew to work in film for approximately 12, sometimes 16 hours on set. And for me, and I just was like, that seems very capitalistic. Like, that just feels very exploitative and just very unethical to have anybody in any job work for more than 10 hours. That's insane. And I would argue with my professors about it. I was like, I just feel like this is very exploitative and you shouldn't have people working this long. And, you read stories about people in the film industry who drive home and crash their car because they're so exhausted from hours and hours on set. And so I was adamant, and I told them, I was like, listen, my goal is, I don't want anyone on my film set for more than 10 hours. 10 hours is the maximum, excuse me, that people can be on my film set. And they told me it just couldn't be done. They're like, it's not realistic. It can't be done. Something I heard a lot, and it's my least favorite thing to hear, is, well, we've just always done it this way. This is just how it is. And I'm like very naturally rebellious. I'm like, well, I don't care if it's been done this way for how long Hollywood's been established. The people who established Hollywood did not look like me, and they did not have my perspective on life. And so why should I follow those rules? And so I'm very proud to say that for my thesis, the longest people were on set, I believe, was 10 hours. And we averaged about 9 hours on set, which is truly unheard of for even just a short film. So it's very basic things like that, I would say.
I think over here in the photography industry, everything's a 10-hour day. And if you want to go over a 10-hour day, it's overtime. So we're always...
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Film industry is not like that. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's ideal.
But I think overall it's changing in terms of the number of hours any human being could be on a job. You hear, the longer someone stays working, there's a threshold, and after that threshold, then safety falls, creativity falls, and all of that. So I think I might have to agree with you on that one. It doesn't seem like it's a good idea. Téa, can you walk me through your process from how does it work when you get an idea for either a novel or a screenplay? And then we have to talk about that pilot, my dear.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Until then. So how do the ideas come to you, and how do you make them? What do you do with them?
I would say it's unusual. It's like, maybe it's not an unusual process, but I didn't really even start describing my stories or style as campy until my friend pointed it out to me. for me, I was kind of just creating the stories and then that was it. But they kind of pointed out like, hey, you realize your stuff is kind of weird. It's kind of campy. It's a little whimsical. There's always some supernatural thing happening. And so I really am not even consciously thinking about it, especially until, they pointed it out. The one true consistent thing is characters. Any story that I do, the characters or a character has to be really strong. And I really love character-driven stories overall. So sometimes I will start with the characters. Maybe it's just like a group of friends or, it's just one person. I kind of develop them. I use Pinterest a lot. Pinterest is my best friend. I love Pinterest. So like world building, camera ideas, lighting ideas, wardrobe, set design. I mean, everything I do is truly on Pinterest. So I'll kind of create the world and the character first, and then the story comes later. Or it's the opposite, where I kind of get the idea of like, I want to do something like with academia. Like, why not? I never see brown people in stories about academia. I want to do some sort of like dark or light academia story, and then everything else follows. But I think world building is probably the most important thing for me. It's the first thing that I'm really digging my hands into. And again, I don't even really think of it as campy until I guess it's done, and then I watch it and I'm like, what the hell was that? What was that? Who did that?
Can you can you walk us through world building? Because I think, we have a lot of different people who listen to the podcast. Some of them are artists, some of them are not. And I think that sometimes there are words that we use within our specialities that they may not really fully know. But so I'd love to hear from your perspective, what do you consider world building to be?
I'll give, I guess, 2 examples. So I am writing 2 novels. One of them is kind of a contemporary or like modern Gothic romance. First time writing romance, fun. Outside of fan fiction, don't at me. The second is a contemporary fantasy. And so depending on the genre, your world building or how you kind of create the environment that these characters are in will be either really deep, like it is with fantasy, or kind of not as in depth as it is with the romance. So for me, world building is, it really starts with questions like, how do people speak to each other? You kind of have to look at our world itself and see how diverse and how different it is depending on where you go. And so how do people speak to each other? What is slang that people use? How do people dress? How do these certain characters, how are they received by the way they dress? What are the typical environments that these characters are in? Are they in a world that is super brutalist and gray and kind of foggy, or are they in a world that's very natural and green and very flourishing? Even something like makeup, like what kind of makeup would this character wear? How is this makeup received in the world that they live in? You can either start from the ground up and really kind of truly, like Sims, like create the world and the entire environment, or what I do is I kind of look at the world we're already living in and I almost play like alternate reality of what if these characters or these people in this story existed in a town or in a realm in which racism did not exist, or maybe race did not play a factor. How would their world then be influenced by that idea? And that's kind of where I approach world building overall.
I love that. I hadn't thought about the makeup or the slang in terms of how people talk with each other, but it's so true. The way you and I speak on this podcast would be very different if you and I were at a cafe chatting, I'm assuming, right?
Right.
There's a bit of like thought behind the fact that so many people are going to receive this. And so there's a bit of performance in that as well. And when you're talk about Graveyard Shift, because the way that the 2 main characters in Graveyard Shift talk with each other is very colloquial. They know each other. There's this comfort in the way they chat, which would be very different than the way that you would speak to, I don't know, like a lawyer. It's very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so now that you're out of Pinterest, you've built your world. So then when you are writing, what are some of your writing routines that you may have?
I try to write every day. I think that's why I have so much going on. I would say routine is, and it's hard to balance with work. I think that's something we don't really talk about in the artistic space, is especially if people have another job. It's like, how do you balance artistic time and creative time with work? So even while I'm working, or, in weeks that I am at my job, I try to dedicate at least an entire day to that creative medium. So even if I'm not necessarily writing for it, if I'm world building for it, I try to have and dedicate an entire day, like truly no social media distraction. So my friend calls it like I put like videos on my TV while I'm writing, but they don't have sound, but they're just like beautiful videos, or it's like videos of people making like cafe drinks. It's very strange, but it kind of just like, it has some sort of stimulation happening while I'm writing, and my friend calls it my like baby stimulation videos because I kind of have to have like something there. I'll listen to music, but I really try to have no distractions and just like for the entire day, just write something, even if it's just a page or maybe a scene or maybe the beginning of the story or the end of the story. I tend to write chronologically, or sometimes I'll bounce around. So if I feel like I'm kind of hitting a wall with like my novel, I'll just start writing for the screenplay. And then maybe I discover something in the screenplay and I go back to the novel and I'm like, oh, it's a dialogue issue. Like, of course. Oh, I really need to kind of fix this part. So I think really giving yourself that creative space and time and really setting your environment is the biggest thing that I do when I'm writing.
I kind of do the same thing that you talked about, putting a video on your TV. For me, I have normally when I'm working, I have two screens, and one of the screens is one of those cafe YouTube.
Yes, like the
There's like,
lo-fi.
yes, the lo-fi
Yes.
cafe. And currently I'm following a few folks who, there's this one person who does these lo-fi views, but he'll go to Panama City
Oh,
and they'll do Pomodoro techniques for writing and for working, where you work for a certain amount of time. I have to have that, or I have to be at a coffee house or something, because I need the distraction in order to be able to focus. I don't know
yeah.
why.
I think
Yeah.
it's the ambiance. I think, and something I would say too is writing outside the house. I will say I tend to do some of my best writing when I'm at a cafe or I'm at a coffee shop. I don't know what it is. I think it's because when you're at home, you're almost too comfortable, where it's like you're not entirely in work mode. But I think when I'm at a cafe, maybe it's just the vibes, maybe it's just the aesthetic, but I'm a writer, like I'm a writer in a cafe, and I feel like really in my moment there. Maybe that's why I do like the best writing at a cafe. But yeah, I think finding ways to be creative outside of your home, you'll find like motivation or inspiration that maybe you wouldn't have if you were just in your bedroom or in your living room. So, and I've met people too at cafes, like writers, where they've come up to me and they're like, "Are you a writer?" And I'm like, "Yes." They're like, "I'm
Oh,
also a writer." And so you make
nice.
these connections because it's like, girl, you're not the only one who wants to be like a cute little writer in a cafe. Like, you're not original in that sense. So
Oh
it's
my
cool.
gosh.
Yeah, I think explore as you create, for sure.
It's so true. And then accountability as well. I have a good friend. She and we meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 5 a.m. my time. She's in Europe, 5 a.m. my time. Forget where it is for her. 12 o'clock for her, I think. And it's necessary because you have to, and I have my creative job. I have this podcast, and then there's another job that I have as well. And you have to think about what are some of the priorities that you want to make for your art and to achieve your goals and your dreams. That said, can you tell us anything about your upcoming pilot? Or did you write it? Did you just help produce it? Tell us.
Like most of my ideas, they're very just spur of the moment, and they're just motivated by my own need to see the thing. And I think I don't know if you like watch Marvel, but I very much have this mentality like Thanos, where it's like, fine, I'll do it myself. And especially like when it comes to representation, I think sometimes I'll watch something and I'm like, I would have loved to see more brown people in this, or I would have loved, like, how interesting would this story have been, or how would it have changed if it was a little bit more diverse. And so I kind of get antsy, and then I'm like, well, I'll do it myself, fine. And so for this pilot, I noticed the academia aesthetic becoming very popular online. And it's not new. Movies like Dead Poets Society and even Harry Potter kind of play into that academia kind of world. And there's always something almost like spiritual and supernatural about the aesthetic that I find very interesting, but it is unfortunately very European. It's very Eurocentric. There really is not a lot of diversity. But for me, as a Black woman having gone to college, I kind of wanted to touch on my experience, especially going to a predominantly white institution as a brown person. Taking that, I was like, I want to write a dark/light academia story with a Black woman as the lead and kind of touch on the things that she has to see and undergo being the identity that she is. So whether that's class, whether that's race or gender, and have her be the smartest person in the room. And also there's like ghosts. There's always has to be some supernatural element. So yeah, that's kind of just like a little sprinkling of what it is, but I'm really excited about it. I started writing it just for fun. I didn't write it with the goal of like, I have to make this, or, it was just like, I don't know, like this would be kind of fun and cute. And as I started writing in it, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to have to make this. Like, I think this is going to have to be a thing. And I love it because I just wrote it out of pure artistic joy without any career goals or kind of like monetary inhibitions. It was just like something I wanted to write that I would love, and I really love it. So, yeah.
Can you talk to us about the translation from wanting to get it done? You write the thing. Then what happens? What do you do next?
Well, if it's for film, I also am a producer. Some would say because I have control issues, and I would probably agree with them a little bit. If it's my story that I wrote, I'm like, I need to be at the beginning of that process. So for film, I guess like for my thesis, even, I write the thing and then I start to see it. I really start to see it kind of play out. And it's a lot of planning and organization. And I'm a hyper organized person when it comes to film. So I start figuring out locations, actors that I would want to reach out to, budget, probably the like biggest thing that you have to figure out when it comes to film or television. What would the budget look like? Even what would the catering look like? Like you have to organize a lot. And it's funny about film and television too. It looks glamorous, but it's probably one of the most unglamorous artistic mediums in the world because there's so much planning and paperwork has to get done before you actually film. And I would say 98% of film is just preparation and planning and paperwork and location scouting and reaching out to actors and fundraising. So I think that's the process, is like I have all my artistic joy and then I'm like, time to open Excel. Like that's kind of the transition.
Oh, wow. That sounds about right. That sounds about what it is in photography too, because it's always nice to see this beautiful world. And then if you go behind the camera,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
all the people milling around and all the things.
The lights, the C-stands.
The lights, the C-stands, that fake sunrise.
Yeah, the fake fog from the can. Yeah, so it's just logistics. I think logistics is like the biggest thing you have to figure out. And then I don't think for me the magic really happens until I'm done. Like, I think once I'm done and I get to watch it, that's when I feel like I've actually achieved the goal of getting it done. Because I'm like, okay, it was a fever dream, but we made it. We're here. We're alive.
Well, Téa, this brings me to another question, which is, what advice would you have to the young Téa, the one who dreamt about going to film school? And let's say it's the summer before you actually get to film school. What advice would you have for that young Téa?
Probably to hold strong in your beliefs. I think hold strong in your artistic beliefs, in your personal beliefs, and don't be afraid to like be a little rebel. It's okay. I think every industry, anything, I think needs a little shakeup. And so don't be afraid to tell people that you think something is wrong, or you want to change something, or maybe there's a new way to do something. Like, don't, just because an institution has been around for a really long time doesn't mean there's not space for you there in it. So I would say, yeah, just really bask in yourself as a unique individual, and realize that you have something to give to art, to the world.
Well, that is perfect. Téa, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed talking with you. I'm so inspired by you and by your gumption. And I know that other folks listening to this will race to check out your work, and we'll put notes in the show notes about where to reach you. And that said, are there any specific places that you'd like for us to keep in touch with you?
I'm very active on Instagram. That's probably the best place you can find me.
Thank you so much, Téa.
Thank you so much for having me.